Hello, my name is Ellie Dugdale and welcome back to our Farm Green webinar series. Today we are welcomed by Fiona Lovett, who founded the Flock Health Club concept and has been instrumental in establishing the collaborative initiative Farm Vet Champions with FRCVS knowledge. Fiona is passionate about encouraging farm vets to actively engage with sheep farmers through good practice principles that embrace preventive measures and responsible medicine usage. With the focus being ever more on sustainable livestock production, animal health plays a key role in this, and we Dunbia are dedicated to get that message out there to our suppliers. With the increase in cost over the past year, optimum animal health will reap rewards for farm businesses. And on that note, I will now hand over to Fiona.
Hello, thank you for the introduction, Ellie. So I'm going to be talking about healthy animals, sustainable production and safe food. And what is good livestock farming about? It is about producing a quality food product. It's about managing the land sustainably, and it's about operating a viable business. But to do that, we need to have fit, healthy, robust flocks. And fit, healthy, robust flock of sheep means that we need to be using medicines responsibly. And there's two elements to that. It's about targeting medicines if we've got high risk of disease, sick animals, we need to target medicine. But we also need to avoid using unnecessary medicines if the risks are low. So the mantra is as little as possible, as much as necessary. And that's one way that we can maintain sustainability. Why is this important? As a farm vet, I could be driving up through any one of these farm gates. And as I approach the farm, it may be that there's some calves in those sheds and I can hear a bit of coughing. Or it may be that gate on the bottom right-hand screen. As I drive through that flock of sheep, I notice that there are just a few too many lame. But I don't want you to imagine that it's 2023. I want you to imagine it's 2043, i.e. just 20 years from now. Hopefully I'll still be working. That's less than the time since I graduated as a vet. And I want to treat those lame sheep. I want to treat those coughing calves, but I can't reach into the back of my car and pull out a bottle of antibiotics, because by 2043, most of the antibiotics that we're using now, there will be too much resistance on farm for us to use them. So in 2043, I'll be sitting there thinking, what am I going to do? I don't have a bottle of antibiotics to turn to. And so why does antibiotic use matter? And here's a picture of Alistair Fleming. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in the 20s. In 1941, it became commercially available. And right through my career, in fact, right through the careers of most people I'm working with, we've expected success. Our farmers have been able to treat bacterial infections on their farm. Our doctors have been able to treat bacterial infections in hospitals. But we know that selection for resistance is normal and it's expected. Every single time we use a dose of antibiotics, we reduce the chance of it working next time, because we improve the chance that the resistant bacteria will survive as we kill off the sensitive ones. And bacteria are really, really clever. So they can build up resistance and they can transmit it, they can spread it from one group of bacteria to another. So it doesn't stick with that bacteria and that population. It can move into other populations of different species of bacteria, and they become resistant to the antibiotics. We only have two solutions. Either we discover more antibiotics, or we use what we have as carefully as we can. And we may well discover new antibiotics, but I'm quite sure we will not have them to use within the veterinary sphere. If we discover more antibiotics, I'm quite sure they will reserve them for human use. So what's the situation currently on farm? This is just a quick little excerpt of a letter that colleagues wrote about multi-drug resistance in E. coli infection in lambs. This was in 2015, when they first reported that in a lambing shed, people were unable to treat watery mouth infection in 2015. that farm, I know the person who wrote the letter, Emily, I know that farm is no longer lambing sheep indoors. Since that situation, they've always had to lamb outside to reduce the risks of watery mouth. I've had other veterinary colleagues look at other farms, and here there are just 6 graphs here of 6 different farms. And what this is showing, if you are farm 9 on this graph, those big bars, those big coloured bars are showing that the E. coli on that farm are resistant to virtually all of these antibiotics. These are commonly used antibiotics on our farms, and that farm 9 and farm 4 are really not able to use any of them. They've got resistant bacteria. So this was reported back in 2019. The data was collected 2018, probably 5 years ago. The situation gets worse and worse as we go on. It's deteriorating. So what can we do about it? Well, there are risks of antimicrobial resistance, AMR, on every single farm. And what it means is bacterial infections become harder to treat. They cost more. It may be we have our access to antibiotics restricted to save ourselves losing all of them. Certainly farm productivity and welfare will suffer if we can't turn to antibiotics. Certainly the public image of farming will be damaged, and the risk to human health will increase as well. So the solutions are to use as little as possible, but as much as necessary. Don't start giving a half dose. That's the worst thing you can do. If you need to use an antibiotic, use it. Use as much as you need to use, but don't use it where you don't have to. And it's all about the right drug at the right dose, at the right time, and in the right animal. All those are really important. At the bottom there, I put the risk to human health will increase. And I just want you for just a moment to think about your own family. So these are my kids. That was a few years ago. They've grown up a bit now. They hate that photo. And my parents. If one of my children trip over in the playground at school and graze their knee, I want to know that they won't get an infected leg, that they won't have an antibiotic infection that we can't treat. When my mum went into hospital for a hip replacement, I want to know she can have a hip replacement and she's not at risk of a bacteria infecting her new hip that they can't treat. Unfortunately, we use the same antibiotics in people and in animals. And this graph, it's kind of a weird graph because it's on a circle, but back in the O'Neill report back in 2016, so the Cameron government asked Jim O'Neill to write this report back in 2016 and to say, what is the situation going to be in the future? And this great big purple area shows that by 2050, Jim O'Neill, they forecast that there would be 10 million human deaths due to antimicrobial resistance by 2050. I'm afraid that makes the deaths from COVID seem quite contained. This is saying by antimicrobial resistance, every year 10 million people are likely to die because they can't have a bacterial infection treated. I used to think, you always hear of media people giving you a scare story. Maybe it won't quite be 10 million. Maybe they've got a few extra noughts on there. Actually, The Lancet, which is the highly regarded medical journal, reported back in 2022, February last year, they put this report in, and what medics around the world have done was look at how many people had died of due to antimicrobial resistance back in 2019 in a single year. So we're not yet at 2050. It's not that bad, but are we on the way there? And I would say the fact that in 2019 there were 1.27 million deaths definitely attributable to AMR, and pretty much 5 million deaths which were associated. I would say I'm afraid we're definitely on that trajectory. We will be looking at about 10 million and maybe more by 2050. This is a real thing. It is going to happen. We already know we're on the way there, I'm sorry to say. So it is a serious situation. It's serious because it matters on our farms. It matters if you can't treat calves with pneumonia. It matters if you can't treat lame sheep with an effective antibiotic. But it matters because of our families as well. I don't want to be scared if one of my family members has to go into hospital. I want to know that we've done all we can. And we are doing a huge amount. So these graphs are RUMA, the responsible use of medicines in agriculture. These are quite old now, but by 2018, the use of antibiotics in poultry meat had decreased by 80%. We know that in the pig industry, they've made dramatic reductions. From 2015 to 2018, they reduced antibiotic use by 60%. Really impressive. The graph is going down. We can be really proud of these figures. The graph at the bottom, these are high priority, critically important antibiotics that they use in people. And we have really driven those down in the veterinary profession and for use in farm animals. And quite rightly, we're proud of these figures. I have to say, it's mainly evidenced in the pig and poultry industry. We really need the data in ruminants. For cattle and sheep, we really need good data to show that we're being responsible, to show that we're using them well. Most of these figures relate to antibiotics used in cattle, in poultry and pigs. We are making massive progress with ruminants. At the moment, because we don't have good data, it's hard to demonstrate it. Although, if you're a farmer out there, and somebody asked you for your data of your antibiotics, please join us and give them the data. We need all the data we can get. As Ellie said at the beginning, I've set up Farm Vet Champion. So this is working with veterinary colleagues to do absolutely all we can to make sure we don't have to prescribe antibiotics. We want to keep animals healthy rather than have them sick and have to give an antibiotic. And how do we keep them healthy? We plan ahead. We make sure we've got the nutrition, the body condition right. We plan so that we're not in a panic and the wheels don't fall off. We plan before lambing starts to make sure everything is right, the hygiene is good, and we're not going to have problems. And then we do all we can to prevent disease. We prevent poor hygiene. We prevent, as far as we possibly can, animals dying from exposure or poor ventilation or their bedding's wet. Disease occurs where conditions are not good. So as far as possible, we keep the conditions as good as they possibly can be so animals don't get sick because they're in a nasty environment. And then we protect the herd or flock. And if you're a baby animal, protection means you get colostrum. So we make sure in the lambing shed that lambs get good colostrum, that calves get the right amount of colostrum early on in their life, so they're protected. And then for the older animals, we use vaccination. Vaccination's a fantastic way to protect the flock or herd. If your animals are at risk from a disease that can be vaccinated against, the right thing to do is vaccinate. I contributed just last year to the NOAA vaccination guidelines. So the livestock vaccination guidelines, I wrote the sheep section, a couple of colleagues wrote the beef and the dairy section, and we looked at all the vaccines in dairy cattle, in beef cattle, and in sheep, and we said, what are important and what should farms be using? And we came up with a couple of categories, and the category 1 are highest priority. And we said these vaccinations should be considered. We're not in every single flock. So I'll just talk about sheep. That's where my strengths are. So vaccinations against clostridial disease and pasteurellosis, against foot rot, against abortion, should be considered in your flock. It doesn't mean you definitely must vaccinate for them, but you definitely should have talked about it with your vet. So that a category 1 vaccine means that you have had that conversation. You've considered those vaccines for your flock and you've thought, should I be doing it? As a default, you should. unless you've had that conversation and you think, actually, I'm not at high risk for that, I don't need to do it in that class of animals or in that particular situation. So we're not saying every single flock must be vaccinated with every single one of these category 1 vaccines. But what we are saying is every single flock must have had this conversation, should have discussed it. And if you don't need to vaccinate, you know why, and you've justified why you're not vaccinating against one of those. And if you haven't done that, you should be vaccinating for the protection and the safety of your flock. You can access the NOAA guidelines at www.noaa.lvg.livestock.vaccination-guidelines.co.uk, and there you can sign a pledge to say you agree that vaccination is a primary way to protect animals rather than just waiting for them to be ill, which obviously has welfare financial implications. So vaccination is an important, really important part of the protect bit of Plan, Prevent, Protect. Let me just talk about lambing time. I love lambing time. It's in recent history, we've had a huge amount of antibiotics go into neonatal lambs. We know that people were dosing or jabbing large quantities of lambs as they were born. And we know that people were doing that because they believed that was the right thing to do. We know that it may be your vet who said, you need to be giving this dose to prevent watery mouth, for example. What we actually know now is that's not the best thing to do. There are good things to do to prevent disease. Prophylactically treating with antibiotics is not a good thing to do. What that's doing is building up resistance and the chance that those antibiotics are not going to work in the future. So what can we do? We can, again, plan, prevent, protect. So plan in the middle, we can analyse a forage, we can make sure we've got good quality diet, we can make sure we plan that the hygiene, the colostrum, we've got good records, we know what happened last year, we know how we can plan for there not to be a disaster this coming year. We can prevent forced shelter, we can prevent it to be drafty, we can make sure there's clean, fresh bedding, we can turn animals out of the shed as soon as possible, we can make sure there's good hygiene, and we can make sure equipment is clean and disinfected. And then we can protect them. We can protect the adult flock, make sure they're fit and well fed, make sure they're in a correct body condition score, they've got a good diet, they're fully vaccinated, they're sound in foot, they're clean. And that way they will produce good colostrum. And the colostrum, plenty of it, good quality, and quickly will protect the lamb. We don't get watery mouth in lambs that have had enough good quality colostrum quickly enough. So that's what we can do. And plenty of farmers are no longer treating every lamb with antibiotic. Plenty of farmers are putting in plan, prevent, protect in place and making sure they don't have to. And it's paid off. We've dramatically reduced the sales of oral antibiotics in UK lambs. That the particular product that we were measuring is no longer available. We know that fewer and fewer people are using prophylactic antibiotics. So it is a success story. We have got more work to do. We know there are farms that still struggle. Maybe they're farm 9 from the very first graph I showed you. We know we have people who still have got to, who still need help, still need veterinary work, but we are making dramatic progress within the industry. So, well, apart from looking at the welfare and the antibiotic use, if we think about our flock vet and med costs, there's 2 ways we can split what we spend on our flock for their veterinary costs. And there's a sort of bad costs. Nobody wants a vet. Nobody wants to pay a vet. Nobody wants to pay to treat disease. Nobody wants the loss of production or the cost of that disease or the cost of lambs that don't grow. Nobody wants to be buying antibiotics to treat animals. We don't want them to be sick in the first place. Those are all bad costs, and vets don't want to be involved in that. We have to be, but that's not where we want farmers to spend their money. Alternatively, there are good health costs. Farmers can make wise investments in preventative measures, in flock health planning, in robustly protecting flocks, in vaccinating flocks, in making sure that that flock is fit and robust and healthy, so that we don't have to go to the sticky plaster of the bad health costs. If we put enough investment and time planning, preventing and protecting and keeping our flock healthy, we don't have to go to the expensive, depressing treatment of sick animals. You know, none of us want sick animals or poor welfare or animals that are lame or in pain or not producing. It's depressing and it's expensive and it's not good for welfare. The more we can put our investment into planning, preventing and protecting, the better it is for our sheep, the better it is for our flock, the better it is for our own mental health, and the better it is for the environment. So we do need flocks to be productive. Every lamb does count. We need those lambs to be born alive. We need plenty of lambs. We need those lambs to thrive. We need their ewes to be healthy, so they're giving good milk. We need the lambs to be thriving and well. And we need lambs to sell well. We want lambs to be grown well, to look good, to be in optimum health. And a robust flock does everything it can to keep that flock healthy and vaccinated and in good health, and work against anything that jeopardizes the productivity of the ewes and lambs, cause unnecessary losses and stress that none of us need, and costs. So just to summarize, plan, prevent, protect. So these are essential principles we need everybody to do to responsibly use our medicines. But we also need to monitor, measure and manage. So our whole supply chain, right from farm gate, right through supply chain, we need to make sure that we know what's going on, that we're keeping records, that we know how much antibiotics used, that we're sharing that with the authorities so we can robustly protect the reputation of our industries, and that we know we've got safe food on plates. Our industry reputation is hugely important. We want our consumers to be fit and healthy. We want them to know that we use medicines responsibly, and that's just a win-win for everybody right through the whole supply chain. So whether you're a primary producer, whether you've got a flock of sheep, you know, you can play your part and everybody else along the supply chain can play their part, so that our consumers have massive confidence that not only are we being responsible, but we're good stewards of the resources we have, of the environment, and that we can be farming sheep successfully way through the generations, so our grandchildren can also be farming sheep and keeping them healthy, fit, healthy, robust flocks. So that's me, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you for that, Fiona. It was great to get a wider understanding of how to plan ahead to prevent disease and protect the flock health. One message I took away was that an essential component of farm sustainability is the responsible use of medicines to ensure that animals remain healthy rather than the need for them to be treated. So we've got a few questions coming through now from our supply base. The first question I have for you, Fiona, is do you see any different geographical regions requiring different vaccines across the UK?
I think the UK is quite, there are regional differences, but in terms of those category 1 vaccines, so for example, Clostridial, all soil has Clostridial in, so there's no one who can say, I don't need it, because every farm has got soil, they've got Clostridial issues. There are certain potentially disease management or farm management that might make some things more likely. So for example, if you're a well closed flock, there's no risk, you never buy in ewes, and you're well protected with fencing, then potentially you could remain, you don't need to vaccinate against enzootic abortion, but then you've got a naive flock. So if you are going to buy in, or you have any risk of a fox bringing a placenta in from another farm, then you're at risk, and you would need a vaccinated flock. So, but those are the sort of risk assessment conversations to have. But in terms of regions of the UK, I have the same conversations in every region. It's more specific farm management than regional differences, I'd suggest.
Do you have any data on the difference in profitability between lambs, flocks or farms which have been treated against those which haven't?
So in terms of prophylactic antibiotics in neonatal lambs, we have very definitely looked at that. We did a big study a couple of years ago where we got data from a lot of, actually they were Dunbia farmers as well as farmers selling to a retailer. We collected a lot of flock health information. Alongside that was, do you treat your lambs at birth? And we were able to compare people who gave antibiotics to every lamb in the lambing shed compared to farms that didn't. And in terms of farm income, or there was no difference between those. The people who were potentially spending thousands of pounds in antibiotic treatments in lambs were not making more money at the end of the day. It's there's no, in terms of profitability, I would say the people who are using antibiotics most responsibly, that's related to farm profitability. In fact, the study showed the same. People who vaccinate against abortion and clostridial, they are more likely to make money than the people who are not. That was a specific outcome from that PhD.
Perfect, thank you. Lastly then, the last question is, what are the most prevalent diseases at present?
So lameness is an ongoing problem, and it is certainly the reason that the most amount of antibiotics in the sheep industry goes into lame sheep. So it is absolutely right to treat a sheep that's lame with foot rot or CODD. It is right to treat them with an injectable antibiotic. But because we have a lot of lame sheep within the industry, that's a lot of antibiotics. So once again, the key thing is, if you have a lame sheep, definitely treat it effectively as you've been directed by your vet, which will be with an injectable antibiotic. But if you can plan, prevent and protect to avoid them becoming lame in the first place, then that's a definite win-win, because we know a lame sheep costs you a huge amount of money and it spreads to the rest of the flock. The more we can prevent them getting lame in the first place, the better, the fewer number of clinical cases and the less antibiotics we use. So if they're lame, make sure you treat them effectively, but do all you can, work with your vet, go through the 5-point plan. There's masses we can do to prevent lameness. And that's, we do lots of work with farmers on planning, preventing and protecting them against lameness with good effect.
That's a great message. Thanks, Fiona. Okay, perfect. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for listening today. And again, thank Fiona for joining us.